Greetings, my sisters and brothers, in the love and in the light of our one infinite Creator. Just as there are those whose path is service to others, there are those whose path is service to self and control over others. Each who hears these words in this circle of seeking knows those who delight is in controlling, those who have truly moved along the path of negativity, or as it is sometimes called, the path of that which is not, or the path of separation, control strictly for their own benefit. A great virtue of the game rules is that the main metaphysical job of all service to others, polarizing people, is simply to seek ever more deeply to know themselves and to be themselves. Knowing that they are part of a unitary creation made entirely of love, they know that, at base, they are worthy. Therefore, they can explore their consciousness in a direct and truthful way, which is not full of fear as to what the seeker will find. It is a way in which judgment and appearances have no part. It is a forthright, radiant, generous polarity. It radiates unconditional love and compassion, both for the self and for others. The service to self polarity, on the other hand, is contracted in energy and magnetic rather than radiant in energy, as its habit is to pull things to the self so as to arrange them in the way which is desired by the plans of the self, rather than enjoying things as they are and finding ways to flow cooperatively with their circumstances. A service to self polarizing person will likely have much more control over what he/she says and does than will a positively polarizing person. He/she will be attentive to details which might gain him or her an advantage, or give him/her ways to control others' thoughts or actions more efficiently. You can label such people as evil, but all that does is embroil you in the lowercase game board, which loves to judge and make differences between oneself and others, which make the self look better than. When you try to use the words good and evil in looking at polarity dynamics opposites, you may find that these words carry too much emotional charge to be useful for investigation. It is better, for the purpose of thinking about these concepts, to use the terms positive and negative as with magnetic poles. Then there is no emotional judgment rendered while discussing these topics. I am not suggesting that you need to embrace what you consider evil in the pursuit of unbiased thinking. I am only suggesting that in thinking about polarity, it helps to use the neutral terms of positive and negative rather than good and evil or right and wrong. These two sets of dynamics, good and evil and right and wrong, are relative terms. Different things are good, proper, or right to different people and groups of people. In terms positive and negative, being linked to the nature of the polarized magnet, afford us more nearly objective terms. In an unitary universe, each of us has all of the positive and all of the negative attributes and characteristics within us. In fact, we have the whole creation within us, wrapped in the inner folds of our consciousness. There is no judgment in assessing a value of service to self, to someone whom we see either in our personal life or in watching the march of public events on the news, as long as we assign that same value to ourselves and hunt it up from the shadow side of our nature in order to face it squarely within ourselves. When one has a reaction of disgust or judgment to the action of another person or group, we are using another person or group as a mirror to look at our own nature. When we do not like what we see in that mirror, the best thing for us to do is to spend some time contemplating where the seeds of this seeming fault we saw outside of ourselves lies within our own inner nature. So as I talk about service to self, I do not judge it. I am simply trying to describe it and to help you to understand it, so as to avoid being controlled or enslaved by it. The essence of the service to self approach to life is control over both the self and others. The service to self polarizing person does not agree that all is one. He or she is number one. He or she does not see his or her neighbor as him or herself. She is operating out of what psychologists call his or her ego. The operant word for the ego is mine. She sees the world as something which she shall use to benefit him or herself. If she wants something, he or she will make it mine. Naturally, the service to self polarizing person must identify him or herself by what is mine. She has denied his or her own true nature, which is unconditional love. She cannot look to his or her heart, which she refuses to open. In a world in which all is one, we are all in this together. That whole concept is useless from a service to self point of view. That view is committed to the path of that which is not, the path of the self alone against the world. And so the service to self polarizing person identifies him or herself with his or her ideas, intents, and goals, his or her possessions, and the people and things he or she controls. Lost in his or her ego, she cannot let go of these identifying features, as she has no entry into the investigating the path of what is, the path to the opening of his or her heart. So his, her hold on what he, she controls is tenacious, for what he, she holds as his or her defines him, her to him, herself. Do you remember the bully on your grade school playground? He would pick his targets from among those without the ability to defend themselves and systematically steal their lunch money or demand some other payment, day by miserable day. To the bully, other people are not people. They are subhuman. They are either potential victims or potentially useful allies. When we grow up, we continue to see bullies on the playground of everyday life. As we drive, the road is always rich in bullies. On the way to where we are going, we shall probably be cut off by such a driver, right? On a recent drive into town, plodding along a rural road early in the morning with almost no traffic and no car behind me at all as far as the eye could see, I had to brake 4 different times before I hit the interstate because even though mine was the only car on the road, the cars entering the roadway needed to be in front of me. Here's another everyday example of service to self-thinking. There are 2 4-way stop signs at intersections close to my home, these being the only 2 ways out of our little village to the east, south, and west. Each time I drive out, I pass through one or the other intersection and observe the 4-way stop sign. I have often been in the process of braking to a full stop and then driving on when an oncoming car sees that I am obeying the law and cannot possibly accelerate fast enough through the intersection to ram him. So he does not brake at all but sails through the intersection ahead of me, ignoring the stop sign. Why does he do this? Because he can, and because as he is following the path of that which is not, he has no reason to see me as someone to whom he should give respect. My car is just an object he can drive past. Due to my foolish obeying of the rules of the road, if he thinks about the person in the car at all, he thinks of a sucker, not a person. As a person, service to self polarized in nature, he can disregard all rules except those that suit him. There are strong aspects of service to self in the structure of any organized religion, which demands strict obedience to the specific tenets of a belief system. History provides us with numerous examples of holy wars. What a contradiction in terms. Clearly, a creator whose nature is unconditional love does not sanction wars. However, any people whose identity has come to be based on my dogma and my religion tend to come to the conclusion that theirs is the only way to believe, and all those who do not so believe are in need of being persuaded to join the ranks of true believers or to be eliminated. consigned to hell after this life and to a state of not belonging during this life. The various Roman Catholic Inquisitions are another good example of service to self-thinking. The Roman Catholic Church was enough disposed towards control of others for their own good that it tortured many people to death, trying to get them to confess their assumed sins. Their thinking was that the body had to die so that the confused soul would not have to go to hell. Many innocents were condemned to torture and death because they picked herbs for healing and thusly were accused of witchcraft. Many more died for having an inconvenient opinion. Galileo Galilei, for example, was forced by the Inquisition to renounce Copernicus's theory that the earth revolved around the sun instead of the other way around. The ancient view of the world was that it was a flat place, the center of the universe, around which the sun and all the stars and planets moved. Galileo was convinced that Copernicus was right. He is said to have muttered at the time, "Nevertheless, the earth moves." Fortunately, his persecutors apparently did not have hearing as acute as his biographers. As you gaze upon the world seen today, perhaps you may find examples of such religious fanaticism. It seems that the Christians, the Muslims, and the Jewish worlds have within them factions which are yearning for Armageddon. Within each of our societies, the armed services of the country, region, state, country or city in which we live have a predominantly service to self-polarity. The rules of the U.S. Army, as an example, are hierarchical. What the privates do gives credit or blame to the sergeants. What the non-commissioned officers do gives credit or blame to the lieutenants. What the lieutenants do gives credit or blame to the captains. This goes on up through the ranks to the generals, who are given credit or blame for the entire army. The ranks of officers in other armed forces, such as the Navy, the Air Force, the Coast Guard, and police or sheriff's departments, have different names, and the progressions of ranks is different. However, the collecting of credit or blame for the work done up to the man in charge is the same. The top brass in an army, for instance, has no trouble ordering men into a battle, even if they know ahead of time that the odds are that they will all be killed. Their aims are political, economic, corporate, and ideological. The living being in the army who carries out their policies and orders are considered pawns on their game board, or to use slang terms, cannon fodder. One fodder unit, or OFU, is supposedly the term used for an average citizen by some of our leaders. An example of this on the news recently was when a very senior officer was televised while giving a speech in a town where a woman was being honored who had lost her husband and two of her sons to America's wars. She and her remaining family were front and center in the audience. The official received a question from a reporter which was directed to the mother being honored. The reporter asked him to ask the mother if she felt that her sacrifice was worthwhile. However, the officer immediately answered for her, saying he was sure she would say yes. He went on to say that if more of her sons died fighting, she would be equally proud of them, and that their battle victims would be proud and happy to die for their country. What better death could they have? I wish you could have seen the look on that mother's face. It was an expression of utter horror. However, the official's answers show in a way which most leaders are too sophisticated to display that when ideological motivated people are in charge of policy, they do not, even for a moment, consider that the loss of life in their battle ranks is a problem. It is simply what soldiers do. The men are not important. The policies are important. Please understand that I am not judging ideologies such as that official. This report singles out no person or country. I am using this person as an example of the military way of looking at other selves. That official is no better or worse than many other leaders around our weary world who routinely use war as a policy rather than taking the time and compassion to seek for peace and collaboration among nations by diplomatic routes. It is good to look carefully at this televised moment in order to understand the service to self polarity. Service to self persons, for the most part, honestly do not consider that they are doing anything wrong or evil. And in fact, our current government has a careful rationale in place which explains each decision to pursue aggressive policies. There is no acknowledgement whatever of the losses of those who fall in battle, except to call them heroes and remember them on Memorial Day. Another source of this same service to self-thinking is seen in corporations. Like the military, all credit is given upwards, eventually to the chief executives of the corporation. Like the military, extreme measures are considered to be acceptable in this pursuit of winning. The assassin hired to remove a dangerous competitor has no anger at the executive or scientist whom he kills for a price. Assassination is just a job. When an underworld corporation breaks a man's legs for reneging on a gambling wager, it is not personal, it is just business. This depersonalization of people is at the heart of service to self thinking. Many other non-lethal service to self actions by companies are seen in everyday life. Some companies have a policy, whether publicly acknowledged or not, of firing good, experienced people who are nearing retirement age in order to save the cost of their pensions and high salaries. They replace such people with younger and less experienced people whom they can hire for much less money and to whom they may not offer a pension at all. Another example of corporate service to self thinking is found in these companies which have a policy of hiring only part-time help. They do this so that they are not required by law to give them any benefits, thereby conserving the corporate's profits for compensation to the top corporate executives. As a direct consequence, the United States has a substantial number of working people who have no place to live and no health insurance, because no matter how many hours they work or at how many jobs, they cannot make enough money to afford what many people take for granted: a roof over their heads and the ability to care for family members who become ill and need medical services. Perhaps the darkest of service to self-thinking occurs when the military, the religious, and the corporate forces of a nation combine in various ways to get what they want. We are seeing the effects of the mixing of governmental and religious forces in many places in the world today. An example of this is when the preacher of a large congregation tells their congregation to vote for a certain man or party. It is one thing to argue topical issues from biblical text and quote another to tell people how to vote, suggesting that it is a matter of faith. Indeed, our own country's beginnings were rooted in the people's desire to have freedom to believe and to practice their faith without restrictions from the government. To a service to self polarizer, it is he against the world, or if she is identifying a group as mine, it is we against them. That attitude is at the heart of the service to self polarity. It is why the Confederation sources often call this path of service to self the path of that which is not, because it cannot, metaphysically speaking, be one man or one group against the rest of the world. We are the world. It is easy to make service to self decisions in daily life. For instance, against using the flow of traffic as an example. I often need to take the ramp from one expressway to another as I go to an appointment. This particular ramp has a merging lane that ends about halfway along the ramp before descending to the second interstate. Usually I am a good boy and get in line in the left lane that continues through to the second road. Occasionally, however, I am late to an appointment, and then I use the merging lane, thereby inconveniencing the people who must brake to let me in, as well as slowing down the ride for everyone behind them. My rationale is my lateness. However, in taking the merging lane, I am consciously putting others out. This sounds tiny, but such tiny choices and the awareness of them, which allows us to consider them, are what constitute our work on the game board. Here's another example of service to self moments of choice in everyday life. You cut a sandwich in two and one half is larger than the other. If you keep the larger part for yourself and hand the smaller part to your friend, that is a service to self act, in that it puts your needs or desires ahead of another's. This cuts into the positive polarizing you are already doing by sharing your food. Or say you have been sitting in an uncomfortable chair in a meeting. Another member of the group leaves the room temporarily. You move to his more comfortable chair, explaining to yourself that you have a bad back and need a good seat more than he does. That is a service to self act, in that you are putting your own needs ahead of another's. A service to others, game players' only work is on him or herself, as he or she makes ethical decisions and works on themselves. There may indeed be consequences in the outer world. He or she may receive thanks, credit, and honor, or his or her actions may not seem appropriate to others, and he or she may receive condemnation and dismissal. However, the service to self polarizing person will keep his or her eyes on the present moment, not concerned with others' opinions, rather than depending upon the opinion of others for justification. He or she will consult his or her own interest. We all start out life as service to self-oriented people. As babies, we cry for food and attention, and we do not stop until we have been served. Our first brush with service to others thinking is likely to be the parental suggestion that we share our toys. From this first contact with ethics, we wend our ways through our maturing years, balancing what is helpful to us and what is helpful to others in choosing how to behave. Since every situation is complex in our society and many shades of gray, for the most part, replace anything of a black and white obviousness in determining where service to others lies. The challenge is to find our way to our own ethical choices with a clear mind and a remembrance of the nature of polarity.